Manhattan prosecutors agreed today with Donald Trump's request to postpone his criminal sentencing so that the judge overseeing the case could weigh whether a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling might imperil his conviction. Well, no one had to wait very long because the judge in that case delayed the sentencing for Donald Trump until September 18th so that he can weigh whether a ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court impacts the former president's conviction. And today, Representative Lloyd Doggett of Texas, a veteran progressive lawmaker, issued a statement saying that Joe Biden's debate performance disqualified him from running again. For now, leading Democrats are expressing strong backing for Joe Biden. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the majority leader, said during an appearance in Syracuse today that yes, he believes the president is fit to serve. And liberal and conservative media outlets on Monday gave top billing to the news that the Supreme Court granted Donald Trump significant immunity from prosecution. But the similarity stopped there. Liberal outlets criticized the ruling as a biased move from a conservative Supreme Court. They said it only heightened the stakes for November's general election since the decision complicates the criminal case that accuses Trump of trying to overturn the last election. Well, conservative commentators nonetheless celebrated the 6-3 decision and they admonished Democrats who opposed it. Rudy Giuliani is back in the news. The former mayor of New York, the top federal prosecutor and longtime ally of Donald Trump, has been disbarred from the practice of law, according to a New York State appellate court ruling today. The ruling punctuated the downfall of a disgraced lawyer who once portrayed himself as a crusader for law and order, challenged mob bosses and Wall Street operators, and on September 11th, became known as a national hero. Giuliani has filed for bankruptcy. He faces indictments in Arizona and Georgia. He owes $148 million to two Georgia election workers, and he faces other civil lawsuits. And Israel's top generals want to begin a ceasefire in Gaza, even if it means keeping Hamas in power for the time being. Now, this is widening a rift between the military and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has opposed a truce that would allow Hamas to survive the war. And a conservative group filed a lawsuit today against Northwestern University's law school, claiming that its attempts to hire more women and people of color as faculty members violate federal laws prohibiting discrimination against race and sex. This is the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and this is the hour where we go deep, where we dig behind those headlines and bring you those stories that people are talking about. Well, there's been a lot of talk lately, particularly on that debate stage on Thursday night between Biden and Trump about the tax system in this country and who should be taxed at what rate and which of the candidates is going to raise taxes or lower taxes, particularly on two demographics we hear a whole lot about, and that's the ultra or super wealthy people, many of whom favor Donald Trump because of favorable tax breaks that he implemented when he was president and promises that he's made this time around that if he is reelected, that he will continue to afford or ensure that wealthy people receive really favorable tax breaks. And then there is Joe Biden. Joe Biden says he's not going to raise taxes on anyone unless you make over $400,000 a year, which in this country makes you amongst the wealthy people, the top 5% of earners in this country. And Joe Biden says that middle class people have enjoyed some of the best tax breaks ever under his administration. And he says if he is reelected, he's going to continue to ensure that the tax system more favorably advantages people in the middle class. Well, today I'm going to be going one-on-one with a professor of history and African American studies, Professor Andrew Carl. He wrote a book called The Black Tax. This book is really about how our current taxation system is unfair to what he says are the very people who critically need its support. According to Professor Carl, not only do taxpayers with fewer resources, less wealth and power and land pay more than the well off, but he says they are also forced to fight for their rights within an unjust system that undermines any attempts to improve their position or economic standing. In his new book, just came out this year, The Black Tax, Professor Carl reveals the shocking history and ruinous consequences of inequitable and predatory tax laws in the United States. Above all, he exposes the widespread and devastating racial dispossession that occurs based on our U.S. tax system. This is such a timely topic given all of the news around taxation of people of color, all of the conversations we're having on this network and others around reparations and what reparations might look like in this country, particularly at the state level and at the local level and even at the federal level. So I'm super excited to sit down and talk with Professor Andrew Carl about all the work that he has done, all the research that he's done, and what he can teach us about race, real estate, U.S. policies in America, how these policies have impacted particularly urban Americans, Black land ownership, and African American history going back to 1865. And remember, this is the history that states like Florida and Texas don't want people to know. This is the history that in Donald Trump's 2025 plan, we won't learn because he wants to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education. So we know if that department gets wiped out at the federal level, we can forget about it in states that are controlled by Republican lawmakers. So we better learn all we can about our history, about our American history and our Black history while we still have a Department of Education and while there are still professors like Professor Carl who are speaking truth to power. So when we come forward, Professor Andrew Carl is going to educate us about our history, about Black history, about land ownership, and about the U.S. tax system. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
To Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Happy anniversary, KBLA!
KBLA Talk 1580 is now celebrating 3 years of amplifying our voice and uplifting our community. We deeply appreciate your support of this radio station and will always do our level best to earn your support. Here's to many more years of loving and serving our community. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we've got your black.
I know it gonna happen without you.
Celebrate July 4th with savings at Lowe's. For a limited time, save on the essentials you need to make your garden pop for summer, like Miracle-Gro 25-quart potting mix. Get 2 bags for just $16 and get up to 40% off, plus save an extra $50 on every $500 you spend on select major appliances. Hurry, these deals won't last long because Lowe's knows summer savings. Valid through 7/10. Miracle-Gro excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Appliance savings vary based on purchase amount, excluding supply. See Lowe's.com for more details while supplies last.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin Ultra Strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, yeah. Drop it.
Okay.
Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, home of the 2024 Climate Justice Campaign. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Single Moms Planet is a nonprofit organization dedicated to uplifting under-resourced single mom business owners and working mothers nationwide. Single Moms Planet offers comprehensive programs of financial literacy, business development, mentorship, and entrepreneurial training. They provide education, accountability, and hope. Single Moms Planet was founded by model, TV personality, and producer Nefertari Plessy. Nefertiti felt firsthand the challenges that face single moms as she was raised by a working single mother. She learned that the most disadvantaged group in the United States are single mom families. According to the U.S. Census, 30% live under the poverty line. So she decided to do something about it, along with co-founder Cole Patterson. Their goal is to end the poverty cycle in single mother households through education, opportunity, and networking, providing family and child enrichment programs for under-resourced single-parent families. Single Moms Planet serves over 10,000 single moms and their children each year. Studies show that business development and financial literacy provide a positive environment for children and families, exposing them to new possibilities and opportunities. To attend one of their fun events, make a donation, or get more information, or if you need help as a single mom, please visit singlemomsplanet.org. That's singlemomsplanet.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back, and in this hour, Professor Andrew Carl joins us. He is a professor of history and African American studies at the University of Virginia. He specializes in the history of race and inequality in the 20th century. He's the author of several books, including The Land Was Ours, African American Beaches from Jim Crow to the Sun Belt South. He's also written another book called Free the Beaches, the story of Ned Coyle and the battle for America's most exclusive shoreline. And in 2024, he is out with a new book called The Black Tax, 150 Years of Theft, Exploitation, and Dispossession in America. Thank you so much, Professor Carl, for joining us. This is such a timely topic because your book, exposes the history of racist policies that have deprived African Americans of generational wealth, of land, and how the tax system and other housing-related, real estate-related policies does that. And we're having a national and I'd say local conversations, particularly in states like California, about reparations and what is owed to African Americans and why is there this huge interracial, I should say interracial, but why is there this huge intergenerational, wealth gap? And so often when you have this conversation with folks, the first thing people want to tell us, or first thing people say is, well, the people that did that, as if that happened, 100 years ago, are no longer here. And why should we, the people that are here today, pay for the actions of folks, who engaged in this horrific conduct? A senator, well, he's not a senator, he's a state representative, Byron McDonald's from Florida, just made that comment about 2 weeks ago when he was asked about reparations during a campaign stop. So first I was just to ask you, I guess, what motivated you to write this book? As I said, seems to be so timely, related to so many of the topics that are in the news today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. And I'm really, it's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you about this. And I think, one thing that motivated me to write a book about African Americans' experiences as taxpayers in America was the sense that the public narrative, and certainly what politicians on the right have been saying about who pays taxes and who benefits from public spending, is just flat wrong. And the narrative, and it's been an insidious one that has done a lot of damage over the years in terms of creating these myths about, where tax dollars come from and where the public dollars go. And one of the things that, as a historian, I just continued to find evidence that showed that not only was that not true, in fact, it was the opposite. And that's where my book really intervenes, is looking here at this sort of the actual history of how taxes have worked in America, and specifically how local tax systems have worked.
So is your book focused primarily on property taxes or also income taxes?
So my book is focused specifically on local tax systems. And when we talk about local taxes, you're talking about property taxes. And when you're talking about property taxes, you're talking about housing and real estate. And so, one of the things that my book really sort of shows is how, much of what there's been a public conversation in recent years about the history and legacy of redlining, of housing segregation, and the role that housing has played in fueling wealth inequality in America. over the 20th century and still today. Well, my book really shows that it goes even deeper than that, because not only were African Americans being disadvantaged in housing markets, the homes that they owned, the neighborhoods where they lived were devalued because of race, and they were, and because of racism within the real estate industry. But here also, one of the things that my book really shows is how they were also at the same time being overtaxed. And that continues to this day. I mean, African American neighborhoods, Black homeowners are continuing to be overtaxed when it comes to the property that they own and the neighborhoods where they live.
And how does that happen? I mean, how is it that Black folks whose property may not be as valuable as their white counterparts are being overtaxed?
Yeah. So, I mean, I sort of show that this is a problem really as old as African American property ownership itself, that it begins in the 19th century. And one of the sort of key factors here is just how much autonomy and discretion local governments enjoy when it comes to how they assess property and how they spread local tax burdens. So, again, that allows for all kind of mischief to happen, within local tax assessors' offices. But also it's kind of structural in nature, that even if you say, have a system, for the basic sort of fact that, property taxes have been shown to be regressive, meaning that if your property's worth less, it's going to be taxed more. That's, even though that goes against what, the way that the tax should work, that's how it works in practice. Now, if you say take a regressive tax on property, and that African American homes are being devalued because of race, meaning that they're worth less, that means that this regressive tax becomes a racist tax. And that continues to this day. And it's really, the consequences are pretty extreme when you zoom out and look at, the cumulative effects.
Is anyone trying to do anything about this, Professor? I mean, I would imagine that this data that you've collected, this research that you've done, these revelations that you've made in this book aren't entirely new. I don't doubt that you've done some original research and you may have some new information, but this notion that Black folks have been paying a disproportionate amount for properties, I would imagine that that's been well known. But yet, I guess the question is, has there been any efforts to do anything about it?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, one of the things that became really evident when I started doing work on this project was how, the silence surrounding African Americans' perspectives and experiences as taxpayers stood in stark contrast to how much African Americans were talking about these problems, dating back to the late 19th century, where they began accumulating land in the South, and then were facing, among many challenges, that local tax assessors were overassessing their land, selling it at tax sales under sort of oftentimes fraudulent, circumstances. And, today we are seeing, I think, a lot more attention being drawn to this at the local level. So for instance, in Chicago, this is a city I talk a lot about in the book. There's been a lot more awareness of this problem because it remains ongoing. It is still the case today that that Black neighborhoods on the south and west side of Chicago are being overassessed and overtaxed. And there's been a lot of mobilization to, one, get a new tax assessor in office, which they did in 2017, a reform assessor who's been trying to sort of deal with these problems. But here's the thing, property taxes, because they're so local, you have to fight these battles in community after community to get the type of political change. And ultimately, where my book sort of lands is, one of these require national solutions. And one of the sort of, that we need to actually begin to sort of talk about these local problems, not as local problems, but as a sort of national problem.
And what could be done? I guess whenever you think about, because this is happening at the local level, so we're talking about hundreds of different local governing bodies. So if someone were going to try to attack this, try to address it, try to remedy this harm, would they literally have to go county by county by county? Because most taxes on property are assessed by like a county tax assessor, right?
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the problems here. And this is something that, is not only do you have to fight these battles, at the local level under the current structure, but also, in this explains in part why these types of discriminatory practices and inequitable outcomes continues, is that even local tax assessors' offices are actually protected from even federal lawsuits. They're sort of shielded from sort of action at the national level. So a lot of this requires real legislative change at the national level that one begins to, as I sort of argue it toward the end of the book, I mean, one thing we need to do is we need to fund our local governments more at the national level. It's fund our local school districts at the national, because a lot of these problems that I describe in the book, especially today, are kind of downstream effects from the defunding of local governments at the state and federal level. And that leads them into these types of practices that ultimately work to shift the local tax burdens onto the most disadvantaged populations. So one way to address this again is to begin to think about why are we sort of funding these critical needs like schools, like streets, sewers, water, all the things, parks, playgrounds, libraries, all the things that local governments provide and that we expect them to provide. Why is this being left to local governments and their local tax bases to provide? And that inherently produces these real inequitable outcomes.
So let's assume under certain administrations that's not going to happen. Is there anything that at the local level can be done to address this? Because what role does the states play? I'm thinking about these super majority Republican legislatures that you have in places like Florida and Tennessee and Texas and other places, Missouri. Even the notion of trying to address these, racial disparities seems so far removed from anything that they would even consider.
Yeah, well, I think, the first sort of step here is raising awareness of who are these administrators of local tax systems. I mean, in many states, these are elected offices, but the public's awareness of, who's in those offices and how they're doing their jobs are oftentimes, they're sort of oftentimes, not that visible in terms of public officials. So demanding accountability, demanding answers to, why is this problem continuing is the first step. And those are, again, things that can happen at the local level and is happening in local communities around the country. And then again, I think, going up the chain from there and thinking of, ways to, begin to fight for this both in state houses and in the national level.
How do you see this playing into the conversations that we're having in this country at the national and local level around reparations? Because when you start talking about land and dispossession and the taking of land, whether it's through eminent domain, we know so much Black property has been taken from Black people because of eminent domain. We know what happened to Black farmers, the hundreds of millions of acres of farmland that has been taken from Black farmers. How do you see that, the land takings playing into this the bigger conversation we're having about reparations and what your book is about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, my book, we are familiar with a lot of these things that have happened. My book shows how it happened. And I think that's really critical to then figuring out the most effective ways to first, stop these injustices and then begin to assess the full sort of costs that have been inflicted upon generations of African-American homeowners and landowners. I mean, I estimate in my book that, when we're talking about the effects of overtaxation at the local level, because everyone pays property taxes. If you have a roof over your head at night, you're paying property taxes. Either, if you're a homeowner, you're paying them directly. If you are, a renter, you're paying them indirectly, but you're paying them. And as I sort of calculate based on the sort of, figures that the back of the envelope figures here, we're talking about upwards of $300 billion that have been extracted from African Americans since emancipation due simply to the overtaxation or this practice of overtaxing Black neighborhoods and homes and land. Then coupled with that is, and again, this is ongoing, and then coupled that with the other part of my book, which talks about this horribly unjust tax delinquency system that essentially allows for local governments to sell property that is tax delinquent, and in many states, sell it to private investors who then are able to make money off of your debt. And if you don't pay back that debt, then they will take your home and take your land. And this is, as I estimate, I mean, this is one of the, if not the, it's not the sole cause, but it was a significant cause of the massive amount of land that African Americans were dispossessed of in the 20th century. In 1910, African Americans owned 16 million acres of land. By the end of the 20th century, it was down to between 2 and 3 million. And tax sales were one of those things that were, just in county by county, land was slipping out of the hands of African American farmers and families due to, one, having tax bills that were excessive. And then if you couldn't pay your taxes, then they would sell your home at a tax sale. And there were all these investors who were crowding into these places, eager to scoop up that property in places like Hilton Head, South Carolina, which I write about, which again was the place that African Americans owned extensive amounts of land before its development in the 1950s. And now, there are only a handful of families who still, African American families who still live on Hilton Head Island. So again,
hold that thought. I want to get back to Hilton Head because that's come up a lot in these conversations about reparations as well. Definitely want to figure out where that land, 16 million to 2 million, where is that land and how do we recover it if it's recoverable? Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580. We're talking about the dispossession of Black folks and land when we come forward.
More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. New York City Mayor Eric Adams says President Biden still has his support following last week's shaky debate performance. Adams believes Biden started to move forward as the debate went on after kicking things off slowly. The mayor, who is Black, says authentic leaders like Biden aren't perfect and they have good days and bad days, adding that people want to use the worst day of someone's life to define their life. A retired FBI special agent has been named to a top administrative position within the Birmingham Police Department. In a statement released Monday, Black Mayor Randall Woodfin's office announced that Jeffrey J. Brown has been appointed to the position of Deputy Chief of Investigative Operations. Before his retirement, Brown served 22 years with the FBI. Taking a look back in history, in 1964, former President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The new law made it illegal to discriminate against people based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. That's the latest. I'm Amber Payton on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
Drive carefully in Azusa as the Big Rig Fire is currently on the off-ramp to Citrus Avenue on the 210 West. Watch for heavy traffic forming over on the Sepulveda Pass from the 10 on the 405 North before Getty Center Drive up to about 15 minutes due to a crash in the left lane. On the right shoulder of the 405 North at Bellflower Boulevard in Long Beach, watch for a crash on the right shoulder and a backup running heavy on the 7th Street, Highway 22 interchange. And Bellflower's 91 East before Bellflower Boulevard has a crash that remains in the carpool in 2 left lanes with a 45-minute backup from Avalon Boulevard.
Craftsman Days are here at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select V20 tool when you buy a Select battery 2-pack. Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid through 7/20 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers and Angels are back in action tonight after a day off on Monday. The Dodgers are at home tonight against Arizona. The Dodgers are 19 games over 500 and lead second place San Diego by 7.5 games in the NL West. The Angels are in Oakland tonight for the start of a 3-game series. The Angels are 7-3 in their last 10 games. Big props to Angels manager Ron Washington for turning the team around. Dallas Mavericks star Kyrie Irving went one step further than LeBron in the recruitment of free agent Klay Thompson. Irving met in person with Thompson Sunday night to tell him about the advantages of playing with him and Luka Doncic in Dallas. LeBron called Klay Thompson to try to convince him to sign with the Lakers. Thompson agreed to a 3-year, $50 million contract with Dallas, making the Mavericks instant contenders to repeat as Western Conference champions. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader. If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcasts of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Got your black.
Keep following the leader.
Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Our city's hottest weeks of summer are approaching. If you're 60 or older, you're at risk of heat stroke or worse. Extreme heat can kill. That's why KBLA Talk 1580 is part of our year-long climate justice campaign. Has partnered with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and the LA City Department of Aging for LADWP's Powered by Equity event, Heat Relief for Seniors Resource Fair. Join fellow LA seniors who hope to beat the heat and stay safe on Monday, July 15th, 10 a.m. at the Watts Labor Community Action Center in South Los Angeles. Learn about LADWP's Easy Save and Level Pay programs to help lower your monthly electric bill. And there will be tips and resources to be ready and safe in the heat. LADWP customers 60 years or older will be eligible to receive a portable air conditioner while supplies last. Personal ID and your LADWP bill are required. Contact your LA Department of Aging Neighborhood Senior Center for Cool LA Heat Relief for Seniors participation details or visit www.ladwp.com/events.
Hey LA, today I'm here to talk to you about Grid Alternatives, which is a nonprofit in LA that focuses on renewable energy. We serve communities who have been left out of the renewable energy sector. We offer paid job training, and in 13 weeks, you can become a solar installer. 80% of our graduates get hired into the industry, and once you're hired in the industry, you stop at a high, medium income. That could be $20 an hour or more. 80% of our graduates get hired into the industry. Call today so you don't be left out at 323-861-0105 or gridalternatives.org, gridalternatives.org.
Substance use disorder and addiction is so isolating. And so as a Black woman in recovery, hope must be loud. It grows louder when you ask for help and you're vulnerable. It is the thread that lets you know that no matter what happens, you will be okay.
When we learn the power of hope, recovery is possible. Find out how at startwithhope.com. Brought to you by the National Council.
We are back, and Professor Andrew Carl is joining me. He is the author of a new book. It's called The Black Tax. And this book is about the 150 years of theft, exploitation, and dispossession in America of land of Black folks. And before we took a break, Professor, you said you gave some pretty startling numbers about the amount of Black land that farmers owned at the end of the 19th century and what that number is now. I think you said 16 million acres of land at one point, not just farmers, but Black Americans in general, and down to 2 million acres. What is the current state? If you had to estimate, or if you know the exact amount of land that Black folks own today, what is that number?
Is one thing I can say is that the factors that were fueling the loss of land in the 20th century are still unaddressed problems today. There has been some action on some fronts. One in particular, states have been taking actions to address the problem of heirs property, which some of your listeners might be familiar with. This is a problem that has been, disproportionately affecting African American farmers in the South, but also many families living in cities as well, and has made them very vulnerable to predatory investors, and vulnerable to losing their property and not getting really much in return. So again, we're still seeing, especially whether it be in gentrifying urban neighborhoods or even in places like Hilton Head Island today, where families are struggling to hold on to their property because of a system that oftentimes works to disadvantage them and make it harder to hold on to.
So let's go back to so we don't know the exact numbers. Is that what you're saying? It's not clear What?
I mean, it's
How many millions of
we're
acres?
still not close to where we were at the turn of the 20th century. That's for sure. And again, like there's a lot of factors that are contributing to this, but and there's been considerable attention to this problem in certain areas. But I think this is still something that we haven't fully addressed, much less accounted for the scale of loss, which.
So I know you've written a book or written several books about recovering land or where one is called Free the Beaches. You've written another book, The Land Was Ours, African American Beaches from Jim Crow to the Sun Belt. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Bruce's Beach case out in Manhattan Beach, California, where 4 parcels of prime real estate was returned to the heirs of Charles and Willa Bruce. That happened in during this COVID period, during the Black Lives Matter racial reckoning period. We've not seen that happen very much at all, except right now the California State Legislature is considering a bill that would lift the statute of limitations for those folks who've had their property taken as a result of some kind of racially motivated attack, or more specifically, even involving cases with eminent domain. For that would be phenomenal if around the country, if Black families who had property taken from them by eminent domain could go into courts and sue cities and states to recover that land. Do you see that? I mean, that's something that you've come across as a potential way to address the harm that Blacks have suffered as a result of land being taken?
I mean, I certainly commend Los Angeles County for providing a measure of justice to the descendants of the Bruce's family. And I mean, that was long overdue, of course. The problem in some respects is it's hard to scale that out. And really, that doesn't fully capture the disadvantages that African Americans have experienced in housing markets over the 20th century and still today, and the sort of mechanisms of dispossession. I mean, one of the chilling things that my book shows, I think, for anyone reading it, is like much of what was happening was perfectly legal. And it might even be hard to sort of say that the people who were taking this land were motivated by racial hatred or animus. They were just stone cold capitalists looking to make, looking for investment opportunities and seeing a vulnerable population who, because of a variety of circumstances, they could take advantage of and accumulate riches at their expense. And here again, it's like this is.
Well, let me stop you, Professor.
Yeah.
That may be true, and obviously, we don't ever want to underestimate the power of capitalism. But we know in so many of the eminent domain cases that there were Black neighborhoods that were targeted for the building of roads and bridges and other, sometimes undesirable things like waste facilities, and that Black land was often taken.
Absolutely.
And not paid. Families were not paid at market rate. So those were pretty clearly racially targeted takings.
Absolutely. And I would say, again, like what I would argue is that like the problem goes even deeper than those families who were displaced by eminent domain, by condemnation proceedings, by highways. They certainly deserve justice. But even those who did not lose, I mean, those neighborhoods that were surrounding these areas suffered disinvestment as a result of the practices of where highways were situated, which areas got prioritized by local governments. I mean, that's the other thing I'm showing throughout this book is like the way that local governments have operated in terms of how they distribute services, whether it be not putting water mains in Black neighborhoods, not providing sewerage for African American homeowners. These are all things that, both devalued the property that African Americans owned, while at the same time enhancing the property values that white Americans enjoyed. I mean, the problem goes so deep that again, like it requires a full-scale reckoning of all these different factors. And eminent domain is just one among many. And I think, my book really is calling attention to this huge problem of tax sales and the way that local governments have utilized this mechanism for collecting late taxes to, exploit and disadvantage, disproportionately African American homeowners.
So when you talk about the problem the way you do and write about it the way you do in your book, I mean, it seems so enormous. You're right. It's not just eminent domain. I'm working with a family now in Webster Groves, Missouri, a suburb outside of St. Louis. A black developer was going to build a development. It sold the lots to black families. The city fathers did not want this black development, so they changed the zoning. They changed the zoning to make it light industrial, something that would be incompatible with the residential community. It caused the home values to plummet, and only one of the houses was actually built, and there was a family living in that one home that actually went to court to sue for the loss of value to their home by their home being zoned, their neighborhood being zoned light industrial, and by that zoning change alone, causing that neighborhood that black developer had envisioned to never be built.
That's awful.
So, yeah, those stories. I mean, there's so many of those stories. So I guess, I started to think about, if you think about the enormity of the problem, does it make any kind of solution just seem elusive? Because whether it's redlining or eminent domain or zoning changes like this, there's like 20, 30, 40 different ways that black property has been stolen.
Yeah. I guess it's sort of like, what do they say about, how do you eat an elephant? Like one bite at a time. I think, here is a problem that, again, you begin to sort of, you think about the enormity of these problems, it can almost sometimes be sort of debilitating because it seems like, where do we even begin? But, one thing that my book really aims to call attention to is like these mechanisms. Like we need to sort of understand like what were the processes of dispossession? How does overtaxation happen? What are its effects? And maybe as well begin to think about, what are some avenues to begin to undo this problem and then lead to the next one.
No, you're right. Obviously, any efforts to remedy the harm, any efforts to help black families regain their property in the way that the Bruce's descendants were able to do in Manhattan Beach is a step in the right direction. When we come forward, more with Professor Andrew Carl, Professor of History and African American Studies at the University of Virginia. He is a noted scholar on the history of race and inequality in the 20th century. His work focuses on housing and real estate, land use and ownership, and local tax systems. He's out with a new book called The Black Tax, I should say, 150 Years of Theft, Exploitation, and Dispossession in America. Got a lot to talk about. Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Chevy Radio 30 before and after, code GWMR0254000.
With the incredibly spacious 3-row Chevy Traverse, you can change.
Let's just meet at the concert.
Into.
Why don't I pick all you guys up on the way?
The advanced safety engineered Chevy Blazer EV lets you turn. You think we should turn back? Into.
Full steam ahead.
And with the affordable Equinox EV.
Keep an eye out for the next Charger, kids.
Becomes.
Get comfortable, kids. We'll be home in 4 hours.
For summer adventures, Chevy's got you. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive.
Tune in to More Than That with Gia Peppers live this Sunday at 4 p.m. or wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode of More Than That is sponsored by Kroger, giving families the quality food they crave at prices they deserve. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Tips to help improve basic steps for building a budget in 2024. Building a budget can help you achieve and reach your financial goals. With a budget, you can keep track of your spending, avoid and get out of debt, limit overspending, pay bills on time, and build solid savings habits. What's the best way to get started? Figure out how much to set aside for expenses, like rent, mortgage, bills, groceries, and entertainment. Understanding your past financial habits can help you make the proper adjustments for your budget. Adjusting to a budget can take time as you work to find the right balance, but keep working on it. For more financial health tips, visit chase.com or stop by a local branch. This segment is sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company.
Linking social justice and climate justice all year long. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, Black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
We are talking in this hour with Professor Andrew Carl. He's a professor of history and African American studies. He's written a really important book on the Black tax and the impact of the tax system on African American land and property. I'm sure, Professor Carl, you saw the recent decision by the Oklahoma Supreme Court basically dismissing the lawsuit of the remaining two survivors of the Greenwood 1920 massacre where over 300 people were killed, and countless numbers of Black businesses were burned to the ground. A whole community of Greenwood, Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma, was destroyed. That's an example. I was just talking to a good friend of mine who happens to be the lawyer for the survivors about that was the second time that lawyers had gone into Tulsa and tried to get restitution, reparations for those survivors. First was in the early 2000s. Case went all the way to the Supreme Court with the esteemed attorneys Johnny Cochran and Charles Ogletree. The Supreme Court says no, statute of limitations had run. This time, Demario Simmons went at it a different route, tried to use the Oklahoma public nuisance statutes to get around that statute issue because there is no statute of limitations on an ongoing public nuisance. But the court said public nuisance statute not applicable. This isn't a public nuisance. What's your thoughts? What are your thoughts about the case in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the way that those survivors, the only two living folks, can't get any redress from the significant destruction of property in that case?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the fact that there are still survivors, is a reminder here that the racial injustices of the 20th century are not somewhere in the distant past. That these are still things that we are sort of living with today. But also the fact that the courts consistently refuse to want to address this is a reminder that we can't sort of rely upon sort of justice happening. And in fact the system is very much adamantly aligned against really addressing and coming to fully account for the scale of losses. And this is something that we think should remind us of how much sort of vigilance we need in fighting, not just to sort of remind the public continually about something like what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but to begin to kind of sort of connect that to the problems that we're dealing with today.
And so earlier in the show, I mentioned Byron. I think I called him McDonald's. His name is actually Donalds. He is a congressman from Florida. Again, he was at some kind of campaign event, and he was asked about reparations. And he says, I'm going to tell you, I don't believe in reparations. It's not a religion, so I don't even know why somebody needs to believe in it. And then he said, if you're going to talk about reparations today, what you're talking about is taking money from other Americans. You're asking Americans today and in the future to pay that bill. Is it their bill to pay? There is this really false notion articulated by this otherwise you would think smart congressman that somehow reparations is asking people today to pay for something that they somehow have no responsibility for. And in this country, your colleagues, Cornell Brooks at Harvard University, and one of his colleagues wrote a brilliant piece a couple of weeks ago outlining all the ways in which this country pays reparations to farmers, to bankers, to victims of 9/11, to victims of storms and other catastrophes. But seemingly, when we get to the question of paying reparations to Black Americans, we get these kind of really uh, not very thoughtful responses and not very accurate responses. Because the other side of this is you are reaping the benefits of the racist policy. So you can't say you're not responsible for something that you're benefiting from. That logic doesn't seem to resonate with a lot of folks.
And listen and note here that from that quote from Congressman Donald, how that the sleight of hand he was using and sort of shifting then the conversation to taking away from other Americans. And this has been a tried and true tactic that I write about in my book on how generations of white Americans, and particularly those in power, have used taxes as this sort of issue to divide people against each other and to kind of obscure who's really benefiting from this system, namely those at the top. And I think, this is, another instance here where, shutting down the conversation before it even begins by simply implying that, any reparations is going to have to come directly out of the pockets of every American, which of course is a quick way to sort of build opposition to it, as opposed to maybe thinking about changing our sort of tax system as a whole to, have those at the top maybe paying a heavier burden as a whole. And so, I think that this, kind of way in which, we shut down conversations over reparations, over a more just tax system, over public spending and all the things that we need to address in this country, from climate change, down to, poverty, all these things require public solutions. And these are things that anytime you start to have those conversations, someone like, Congressman Donalds comes in and says, oh, well, that's going to take something out of the pockets of the average American. Well, it doesn't have to. In fact, again, there's so much wealth concentrated at the top of the pyramid in this country right now that maybe we should be, looking there to, find why can't we ever have any sort of the things that, we need to do as a country, including, thinking about reparations, which we have a history of doing. We provided reparations to those who Japanese who were interned during World War II. There are numerous instances of reparations being provided in this country. In fact, my colleague at Georgetown University, Georgetown Law Center, Dorothy Brown, who wrote the book, The Whiteness of Wealth, another book on how the tax system disadvantages Black Americans. She's been doing work on this very issue right now about this kind of history of reparations for everyone in this country except for Black Americans, perhaps the most deserving of.
And that's the point Cornell Brooks wrote about it too, is that there are so many instances and examples of this country paying reparations, and we don't have folks making the comments like Representative Donalds, well, you're taking something from me. When we pay taxes to support public schools and we don't have children that go to public schools, no one's asking the question about, well, why are my tax dollars going to support public schools? We recognize it's for the greater good, for the benefit of all of our society. And there's so many other programs that we can think of that we are literally paying for with our tax dollars, that we could all make the claim, well, I don't benefit. I don't drive down that street. Why do I care if that street is paved? I mean, you could take that argument to, the most illogical.
Taxes are what we pay to live in a civilized society. I mean, if we don't have, we need to find ways to generate the public's money in order to, provide for the sort of the things that we have come to depend on as, a society. And, then the question is who's paying? And I think, my book shows that historically and still to this day, African Americans have been forced to shoulder a disproportionately heavy load while receiving much less in return of the public spending.
Yeah, I mean, and we could easily just have a paradigm shift to say reparations for Black people whose land was stolen is a priority that should go into a budget, because we know budgets are just that. They're statements of priorities, and the tax dollars that we all pay, there's going to be 2 pennies that go to your local public schools, 2 pennies that go to your roads and bridges, and 2 pennies that go to this reparations fund. There would be nothing that would prevent that from happening, other than systemic racism, and other than a belief that Black people, unlike some other demographics, are just quite simply not deserving. So these arguments to suggest that this would be so revolutionary, oh my God, we're going to take something from some other well-deserving American and give it to, implicit in that is some undeserving American. That's all baked into that comment, rather than acknowledging the reality is that we're constantly asking each and every one of us as Americans to pay for things that we may not personally benefit from, but that, as you said, is the price for being in a civilized society. And we recognize that when we do harm to people, or harm is done to them of no fault of their own, like the folks on 9/11 who died because of that terrorist attack. No fault of their own. There was never any question about whether there should be funding made available, and the funding comes from somewhere. It came from whether it was the U.S. government, the state of New York, or some place that funding came from, and we all are a part of creating that funding. So, just really disingenuous arguments made by folks like Representative Donalds. But again, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Professor Carl. Thank you for your work. Thank you for this new book. Obviously, I'm sure people can find the book, The Black Tax, 150 Years of Theft, Exploitation, and Dispossession in America, everywhere books are sold online. I looked it up on Amazon. You can go to Amazon and buy it. You can buy it at Barnes & Noble, buy it where all books are sold. But your work and your voice on these issues are so important. So again, appreciate you spending some time with me today.
Well,
all right,
thank you
folks,
for
you know where
having
to find me. All things Areva Martin on social media. And if you miss any shows, make sure you check out the podcast, Areva Martin in Real Time, wherever podcasts can be found. Next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers in the Raw Report.